than October or November. Somebody did ask a question if we had estimates for the moving and storage costs. We do not. We were in the process of working with Zosmer Frisch, who is our architect project manager, and COVID hit. And so that was our last step. So what the board has decided through the direction of the Transition Location Committee and the Steering Committee, we kind of designated a portion of the 9 million, that being 1 million, to incorporate moving, storage, closing costs, whatever costs we could incur. We estimated very, very high, so we don't anticipate we will spend that much, but at least we had a number to work with when we were talking about moving forward. So when we do get to Addith, it is an all-inclusive lease. It is $175,000 a year. We do not pay any additional costs. They pay any repairs. There is nothing additional that we need to pay. And then as far as staffing, somebody had mentioned that. Included in that $175,000 is maintenance. So, you know, the things that Floyd does for us at Temple Concord, that will be handled by Temple Addis maintenance staff, and they have a number of people on their maintenance staff. So we're hopeful that that will work well, and we think it will. No other staff is scheduled to no other Temple Addis staff is not taking over any of Temple Concord's staffing responsibilities other than maintenance. So
let me just pause you for a second. Sam, did you need a point of clarification on anything that's been said so far? I see your hand is raised. Let me unmute you.
I don't think it's that important at this stage. I just want to emphasize there is a way, even if the council did not overturn the designation, it doesn't mean that the developer can't get permission to demolish. It just is a much lengthier,
it's complicated,
time-consuming and costly negotiated process. And it's something I would assume the developer would want to avoid, and I don't know whether they would commit to go through it. Plenty of times it's been successful for the developer to do that, but it is a messy process, and I think in this case, totally unnecessary. So we'll see, let's see if they can amend the designation the way we think it should be.
Exactly. So thank you for that. And I did know that, although I don't know much about it, something about appropriateness and approval for, I don't know. But thank you for clarifying that. You're right. It's not dead in the water necessarily if on Monday it doesn't go our way. So the other questions that were on, the small chapel at Temple Addith is, I believe, as large as ours. 75 is what is the number I'm recalling, but it could be 65, it could be 85, I don't remember, but it's certainly big enough to hold our Friday night services most of the time, and Saturday morning services most of the time. But of course, Rabbi and Cantor could speak more to that than I can.
Just pause for a second. Gary wants to.
I just want to say.
Gary has.
Oh, you know, right? I forgot you were on.
Yeah, I don't have my numbers in front of me, but the chapel itself, without the back, is at least, well, it's significantly bigger than our chapel, and with the back, it's another 80 people or so. I can get you the exact numbers. I have the numbers, it's just in the other room. But their chapel, even just with the back door closed, is much bigger than ours.
Right. So their chapel opens up, their boardroom is right behind their chapel. So their chapel opens up so it can, sounds like almost double in capacity. And I had forgotten that, Gary. Thank you. So for those of you who don't remember or didn't know, Gary Slutzky was or is the project manager. So he has been working directly with our architects, Zosmer Frisch. So Gary, please jump in and answer anything that I can't or that I say incorrectly. So regarding the kosher versus non-kosher, right now it is strictly kosher under the roof. We are allowed to have kosher, non-kosher food in the parking lot if we were to have a food truck or something come in, but right now we're sticking with the kosher, and not to say that that can't change in a year or two, but that's what it is.
Let me pause you there, because I think that gets to a little bit of aspect of ritual and observance. So Dan, Rabbi, would you mind, you've had some interesting comments on that in these last calls.
Yeah, I mean, the kashrut thing, I mean, yes, it's a change, and no, it's not a huge change. I mean, it means that our system of potlucks is going to change. At least for now, we're not going to be able to do potlucks. There's hope that maybe we could do dairy potlucks at some point down the road. In terms of our Shabbat dinners, it frankly just means we're going to have a different caterer. We've had one caterer, and I'm totally, Bianchi's is the one. I was about to blank on the name, but it's Bianchi's. And it means we'll switch to a different caterer. In the grand scheme of things, that's not a hugely noticeable thing. The feel of our Shabbat dinners will be the same. We have a lot of potlucks throughout the year, though, not just on Friday nights, but Saturday noons. That's going to shift a little bit. And so we'll adjust to that and work through it. Both the Cantor and I have worked through sort of beginning preliminary how to do all of that. And we're both fairly convinced that this is not a huge hurdle to overcome, that this is the sort of thing that we can work through. And I suspect that it will be that way for everybody else. And the other worry that I've heard voiced is that it's going to be much more expensive. And I don't believe that's the case. I think that given that there are kosher bakeries, plural, in town, both Harrison and BJ's, and that BJ's carries an awful lot of kosher items, people could host, bar mitzvah receptions, or we could have, a pre-oneg or whatever, and there will be virtually no change to what we're currently enjoying. I think those will be far simpler than what it may appear. So in the grand scheme of things, I think that one goes in the garden variety of, you move to a new house, you have to decide which cabinet's going to be the glasses cabinet and which one's going to be the bowls cabinet. It's that kind of thing. It's not I don't think it's a whole lot worse than that.
Okay, Jeanette, you're on a roll.
So Gary just sent a chat message. I don't know if everybody sees it, so I'll just tell you what he said. He confirmed that Temple Addis Chapel seats 75. So, and then of course it opens up, so 150 or so.
No, that's Concord's Chapel, seats 75. Addis Chapel seats approximately 80 with 50 seats in the back.
Excellent. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, very good. Teamwork, I like it. Thanks, Cantor. So just a couple more questions and then I think Steve and Sam, I think I've covered most of the content in your emails, and then if not, certainly ask. I tried, and you guys asked a lot of very good questions, so I'm trying to combine it all into one. As far as combining programming and services and religious school, no, not right now. Maybe that's somewhere down the line, but again, that is more of a clergy question and a Cantor educator question. But the plan, just as if we were going to go to a neutral space, was to keep Temple Concord as is, have its own identity and its own services and such. So, are there plans of merging eventually? No. Not right now. We're not talking about that. That's, right now, Temple Addis is strictly a temporary space. I know, and Cantor and Rabbi, please step in and talk more about this if you like. The leadership, clergy leadership and the board are going to start to talk about future planning and strategic planning, and so that will all be part of it. But as of right now, there are no conversations going on about merging. Rabbi or Cantor, did you want to say anything more about that?
I think you stated it pretty well.
And then there was one final question, which I don't know that I answered. There are no special fees that we have to pay to Addis as members and such. Again, it's all inclusive in the $175,000 annual fee.
And Jeanette, I would just add to the piece about the visioning. You know, we had originally said and committed to beginning the visioning as soon as we get into our temporary space. Might not happen for another year. So we are committed to beginning the visioning sooner. And likely we'll start with that. Possibly, we don't have specific plans. So I don't even want to give a date, but it'll happen sooner than later. I see.
Thank you, Mr. President.
I see a hand from Sam, and Rabbi, I'm not sure if you wanted to say something too. Go ahead.
Just one on facilities. I forgot to ask in my question about our library. They have a good library. We have a very good library. Maybe in the future there'll only be one Jewish library in Syracuse. But do we have plans yet for what's going to happen to our library? Will we keep it? Will we keep it in storage? Will we make it partially accessible? And I suppose the same thing for our archives, but that's a more manageable, smaller type of thing. Is there space in the vast Temple Adith complex? And I know there is a lot of space there because I've been through it all, where we can use space other than the chapel itself. Will we have space to spread out, and where will that take place in that facility?
Short answer. Yes.
Yes. There is space that's particular to the library. It will be smaller than what we have now. Laura Levine, as you know, is working on the archives, and we were just talking about that today. So there's space for that. And I know there was a question that I didn't answer as far as the build out costs. I forgot who asked it. It's about $200,000 to $250,000, give or take 20 or 30, for the build out costs. And that's primarily to build sufficient office space for clergy and teacher resources.
I'm sure that will include a build out of the library too. So it's
Yes.
taking their space and repurposing it. Rabbi.
I'm good.
Okay. You're very good. What other questions are there? So Sam incorporated a lot of your questions in that answer. And Steve, your questions were incorporated in that answer from Jeanette.
I think John Brodsky is waving his hand just so
And Peggy had a question that she posted in the chat.
yes, she did.
Okay, let me answer Peggy's or read Peggy's. Is the chapel available to us at all times? So I'll give another short answer and then say, let somebody else elaborate on it. Yes, but it's shared space. So it's going to be sometimes first come, first served. It's going to depend on use, and it'll require coordination. Our worship space will, so spaces that we have available for worship include the chapel, include the sanctuary, and then include space in their large social hall. And a portion, a section of that is going to be repurposed in a quasi-permanent, but it could be set up and taken down if there's need for a full gathering in the social hall. But a portion of that space will be available for us, and that's part of the design that the architects and Gary coordinated. So there are plans that we could show you if you're interested. We can get you pictures and you can see some of that. John, you wanted to ask a question. Let me unmute you.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, John.
The lease is 3 years, is that correct?
It is a 3-year term, yes. It's
And-
$175,000 annually, not for the 3 years. So
Right, right.
Okay.
And we are going to have good use of the chapel and the sanctuary, right?
Correct.
that-
We will be sharing it, and just to elaborate a little on what Ken said, we can use it anytime that they aren't. And that being said, they have agreed to share it equally. So in other words, it's not always, oh, Temple Adith is using it on such and such a day. It's, oh, well, Temple Concord wants to use it as well. We'll work it out. We're actually going to set up a committee that's made up of both temple leaderships, temple clergy, congregants that will work through all of the kind of scheduling, not difficulties, but scheduling to make sure that everybody is treated fairly.
I am concerned with the identity situation, especially the outside, where I assume and I understand that there's going to be like a Temple Concord facade, which will maybe have our name over their name, or we will have a separate entrance, right? We know that. Tell me more about how we're going to preserve our identity, because obviously our congregants, and I'm one of the oldest, and I'm thrilled with the whole situation, by the way, for whatever that means. I'm just concerned about how we're going to preserve our identity. And with that, maybe you can tell me a little bit about what we're taking with us that we know we're taking with us. Like windows.
We're taking you.
Thank God for that. You're lucky.
Yeah.
I'm taking Carol too.
Thanks for that question, John. Yeah, so this could be a potluck. I think several of us could provide pieces of an answer. I'm going to certainly ask Rabbi and Cantor to chime in on this because, that's such a core question. How do we preserve our identity? So one thing we've said from the beginning is this is all about preserving a Reformed Jewish identity, a Reformed Jewish congregation in Central New York. On
that note, we aren't going to be required to wear yarmulkes in their temple, are we?
No, our religious, and again, I'll let Rabbi talk to that.
That's a question that I think will be asked many, many times. But
John, you're going to be required to wear a yarmulke, but nobody else.
Well, now that I'm getting bald, I'll probably be willing to do that.
Yeah, you'll find that you kind of like it, actually. It helps prevent sunburn. But just fair warning, when you drive in the convertible, it goes flying off really easily.
I'll use a chin strap.
I've tried it. It doesn't help. The short is that, look, our congregation is going to stay our congregation. The physical building is changing, but who we are as a congregation, who we are as a community stays the same. So when we are having our own services in whatever room we're having it, we will use our practices, we will use our prayer books, our melodies, and our rules, which means people want to wear a kippah, they'll wear a kippah. If they don't want to wear a kippah, they don't wear a kippah. They want to wear a talit, they wear a talit. If they don't, they don't. If a family wants to record, to video record or audio record a service for a bar or bat mitzvah, they can. It's totally up to them, which is how we have practiced for decades. So that part doesn't change. The identity piece itself is a challenge. Both Cantor and I are committed to doing everything we can to ensure that Concord's identity remains strong and remains clear. But in any move, whether it is into the building to share with Temple Adath or to any other building, our identity is going to be different than what it was on Madison Street. There is no way to do a move and preserve exactly the same identity because it just doesn't work that way. So we're committed to doing everything we can. So you've already heard mentions of the piece of that. So having a strong library is part of our community identity. That's going to continue. Having a strong appreciation for our history and preserving our archives is a huge piece of Temple Concord. And I'm personally deeply committed to making sure that all of that gets maintained. Our programming, all of those things will continue forward. We have a particular challenge in the immediate future that's virus related, in that everything is changing in terms of how we're practicing right now. And the Cantor and I had a conversation earlier today about how much singing we can get away with healthfully. And there are those who are telling congregations to have no congregational singing at all until there is a vaccine, which could mean that we could be faced with changing our entire culture of worship if we're in person for 2 years, or we could be doing Zoom services for 2 years. The short is we just don't know right now. And living under a pandemic, John, even you aren't old enough to remember the pandemic in 1918. This is a whole new world for all of us. And so we're feeling our way through it, but it's So there are changes related to that, and then there are changes related to the building. There will be times where it feels like it's one over the other, but the truth is they're two very different sets of challenges, and we're working our tushies off to address both. And we're both committed to continuing to do.
What about taking some of the things we know we're taking? Again, I say the windows because
Yeah.
those-
The windows, the lecterns in the sanctuary. I mean, those are pieces of our identity, and of course, those will be preserved. Some of those things may go into storage for the next few years. Some of them may be used right away. So I don't know that the windows, for example, are going to be used in the redesign of our office space. I sort of don't think they're office related.
I don't either.
But our lecterns, for example, the table that the Cantor and I use to lead services from on a Friday night, either in the chapel or in the sanctuary, those will be used probably immediately. It may be that we've got to have separate ones for the foreseeable future because of the pandemic, but they're going to be used. So all of those sort of identifying pieces, of course, will come with us. Things that won't come with us are things like particular tables and chairs in a classroom, or sets of dishes in the kitchen necessarily. Or
Yeah, I'm not interested in. I understand that. Yeah.
But the big stuff that's part of our identity absolutely is going to be with us. I think that's.
Well, I think that really answers my question. I get a lot of people who, like Gary Ornstein, who's opposed to the whole thing, but he just wants to be sure that our identity is preserved.
He's not alone in that regard. By a long shot, he's not alone.
And we all want that. And John, you had mentioned something about signage. There's going to be co-signage. There's going to be so co-equal branding. There is going to be a separate entrance. Similar to the awning that's over the front entrance to Adith now, we'll have something like that for our entrance. Jeanette, did you want to respond to this particular question? I see two other hands from Peggy and Sam.
I did want to respond to something in particular that John asked and Rabbi you responded to, and Rabbi you probably have no knowledge of this. So John, if you're referring to the windows in the sanctuary, they will not be coming with us. They will be part of the sanctuary. The developers' thought is that the sanctuary will remain pretty much as it is, same color scheme. The windows will remain, and just so you know, if you're concerned about the dedications on the windows, they're all on there with stickers. And so wherever we go, probably not at Adith, but wherever we go, those dedications will be dedications at the new place as well. But the physical windows in the sanctuary are not leaving.
But the chapel windows.
Yes, the Berenstein Chapel windows are leaving. So I wasn't sure which ones he was talking about, so I didn't want to mislead.
The stained.
To that end, what about the stained glass in the sanctuary above the bema? Do we know what's the story with that one yet?
Yes, the plan is for us to take that somehow.
And
I worked that out.
What
Yes.
about? Did you say what about the stained glass in the chapel?
Yes, those are coming with us.
That's
they're likely to be stored, but they are coming with us.
Because there's a big history, and when we did the chapel, we spent an awful lot of time and energy picking the artist, telling the story, and dedication, contributions, and I don't think we should. I don't know how Billy feels about all this, but I think that we should take those windows very seriously. I'm not so sure that I'm thrilled with the idea of putting them in storage as opposed to just mounting them on a wall around some room, maybe in their chapel or whatever. I don't know, but I'm kind of a little concerned in that particular area. You might give it some thought.
John.
Well, John, just so you know, Bill was one of the first people that we talked to about the Berenstein Chapel. He's been very involved. He's actually brought in his own contractor. We will be taking the walls, everything with us. Everything is fully removable. And just so you know, the idea of hanging the windows has been tossed around. So it's not out of the question. And certainly that is a work in process, and I'm glad you suggested it as well, because we have had other people suggest it.
Thank you. Okay, Peggy Grossman, I see your hand, and then Sam Gruber.
I can't read. Okay, am I on?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. This isn't necessarily for me, and I just want everybody, the board, sorry, Bill.
Go ahead.
You took the, this is from me. This is not from my husband, who is, as many people know, is involved in this very heavily, but this is not from him. I have heard comments from Temple members, Temple Adith members, being very happy that we're going to come and merge with them. So I guess we're hearing that this is not what's going to happen, that there is no plan for us to merge, that we're maintaining our identity, because I agree with John, that's a really important thing for many people. I'm just concerned about that. And my other thought is, I just want to make sure, I know that we're going to have a whole process of planning and vision planning and all, but 3 years can go very quickly. And I guess I just want to make sure that we're really going to get out in 3 years, that this isn't going to go, oh, well, maybe another 6 months, or maybe another, and then, oh, eventually in 6 years, oh, well, we're all happy together now, so we might as well just stay. I guess I'm really worried about that. Get out as fast as you can. That's my own opinion. Thank you.
Thanks for your comment, Peggy. I'll just reiterate what we've said. We are committed to a Reformed Jewish presence in Central New York, a Reformed Jewish congregation in Central New York. This is not a merger. There was no intention of it being a merger. There's no conspiracy that this is the first step towards a merger. We are committed to a congregation in Central New York, period, stop. So that's that. If some people out of ignorance are using incorrect terminology, they can be corrected. This is not a merger. Feel free to correct them. This is not a merger. In terms of the visioning process, yeah, we're not going to wait until the end to start it. We're going to start sooner, not later. And
let me say a word about the visioning thing for just a second. My gut is that the visioning thing is going to probably start this summer. I don't know the exact dates, but
I hesitated to say that, but that's my thinking.
Yeah, I think it's going to be this summer. One of the first things we've got to do is find the right person to guide us through, because frankly, that there's a specific skill set that none of us that I'm aware of have to help us work through all of that. And again, the pandemic plays into this a little bit. So there are complications upon complications. And I can tell you in the conversations that I've had, and I've had conversations with lots of people about all of this, everybody is committed to the same thing. Everybody is committed to maintaining a Reformed presence. Everybody is committed to having this visioning process. Everybody is committed to doing everything we can to propel Concord forward for another 180 years. There are interesting challenges, that some that were predictable and some that really weren't. But I haven't heard anything other than really uniform commitment all the way around.
Thank you. Sam, I see your hand.
Well, I certainly share Peggy's concerns. I think they're very natural. And I suppose if one looks across the board around the country, you probably have a 50-50 split of where these kinds of things became permanent or one congregation ceased to exist. And so that's always a danger, that complacency, comfort, becomes a driving force. I was just down in recently in Elkins Park at Knesset Israel, which is one of the oldest Reformed synagogues in the United States, but not as old as ours. It was founded, I think, in 1848. and they have a big 1959 complex, actually kind of similar in dimension to Addith. They've done a partnership where a conservative synagogue has moved in Melrose, which coincidentally is now led by Rabbi Sherman, who used to be the rabbi at Addith. And they've been working out a lot of this same kind of balance between the two branches, although at Knesset Israel, it is the Reform congregation that is in the driver's seat, but the conservative congregation is possibly the more dynamic, religiously dynamic of the two partners. So it's interesting, and if the committee hasn't looked there already, and I'm assuming you may have, because I know Dan is a friend of Rabbi Sussman down there, it would be a good case study to look at. And there are many other case studies of shared spaces. And one of my questions was about a merger, because mergers take many forms, and there is the possibility of having a merger of an institution, of a not-for-profit, that still can maintain diverse congregations. But what you're doing is consolidating all of your administrative costs. It's sort of like city-county consolidation, how we're always talking about shared costs, but separate identities. And even though I was never for this, and I'm not wildly for it, I do think it is worth consideration as we go forward. On the liturgy question and on the space question, I don't think we addressed what do we do on the high holidays. We talked about the Friday night and Saturday morning, but what happens on the high holidays when both congregations need a larger space? Have you considered that or looked at that? And what are your thoughts, Dan and everyone else?
We have thought it through. I can't tell you where the high holidays this fall are going to be. In theory, they'll be on Madison Street, but the likelihood is, given the pandemic, I can't begin to comment yet.
We may be zooming. At least some of them.
Zooming is looking more and more like it's going to be the best bet, to be very honest. But we're not ready to make that call yet. In terms of the space at Addith, the likelihood is that they'll be in their sanctuary and we'll be in the social hall. Their numbers have decreased enough that they no longer need either the carpeted foyer or the social hall for extra seating for high holidays. So the real question will be sound, and can we make sure that the sound from both services doesn't bleed into the other? And so obviously that'll take a little checking in advance, and we'll figure out either we can, if there's a problem, either we can address it or we can't. And if we can't, then we'll have to find an alternative space.
Piggyback off of that, that's part of this experimenting process. As we get in there, we'll see which spaces work best for us, and if there's a need, what remediation needs to be done. Jeanette mentioned there's $1 million that we have, that we're holding. We're not going to spend $1 million on the first day we move in. We're going to spend as little as we need to move in prior to prepare for, and then we'll see if there's need for sound baffling. If there are other issues that can be addressed for this temporary space.
And there will for sure be experimenting going on. I mean, when you move into a new house, you put a chair here, and then after a couple months say, maybe it should be over there, and you wiggle things around. I'm positive we're going to be doing that. And we'd be doing that regardless of where we were moving. We'd be doing that with any building. So we'll have to work through it. High holidays is going to be a busy time there. When you've got two congregations there, that's going to be more people than have been there for high holidays in some years, because their numbers have declined over the years. So it will be a crowded place, but that's a good problem to have, and we'll be able to figure it out.
Yeah. And Sam, thank you for bringing up that idea of shared space without being merged organizations. So there might be aspects that, as we go through our planning process, will make sense to share other costs, but we will have our Reform Jewish identity. They will keep their conservative Jewish identity. We're not looking to convert them. They're not looking to convert us. And there are examples, as you mentioned, other examples besides the one that you mentioned, that we can use as models. That'll be part of our that visioning process as we look at it. And, there's a lot of interest in the larger community about, some central campus or something like that, where all of the congregations could share that central space, but maintain their unique presence. I see Gary and Amy Slutzky have their hands raised. I saw John raise his hand. Sam, do you have a quick comment in response to that?
Only that I forgot to mention, for John's sake, in Elkins Park, the conservative congregation, which is the renter, has its own entrance and its own distinct signage, both from the street and on the building, to give them their full identity. So it is easily done, I think, and it shouldn't be a big problem to worry about.
Thank you. All right, hold on, John. I saw the Slutsky's hand first, and I'll come back to John Brodsky. So
Hi, that was me. I have a comment and a concern related to one of the things that Peggy said. Hi, Peggy, I'm Amy. Peggy had mentioned a concern about will we really be out of there in 3 years? And I guess my comment is I'm a little, I don't know, skeptical, cynical. I agree, 3 years can go by really quickly. And I don't know if we should be promising anybody, including ourselves, that we'll be there in 3 years. But then, Rabbi, I heard what you said, and I liked what you said about we're going to get going right away on visioning and planning. And that sounds great. If we do that right away, maybe we can, achieve our goals and have plenty of time to do lots of visioning and planning and be someplace else in 3 years. But then I have a concern with a following analogy. If you can imagine, and many of you have gone through this, if you have a family with the mom and the dad and a bunch of kids, and you're moving into a new house, and let's say that house is temporary for a year or two, and at the same time you're building another house, you need to put energy, both emotional energy and time and physical energy, into making everybody feel good about the current move and the new place and making everybody feel comfortable. And at the same time, put a lot of energy into planning the future place. Just seems to me like heading for trouble, that something's gonna leak and not work so well, and somebody's gonna feel it someplace. But I guess I'm concerned about how can we put our energies into planning for the future and into making ourselves feel good where we are for the next year or two at the same time.
Go ahead.
I have two sort of quick thoughts of that. One is that we're going to need lots of volunteer help. We can't ask the same people to keep doing all of these tasks together. We're going to need lots of hands on deck. The other is, frankly, the pandemic might actually be our friend in this. And in that, if the pandemic forces us to stay away, then it allows us to focus more on the visioning piece
True.
than having to deal with the other part. And I have no clue. I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, so I can't tell you where it's going to be. But I can tell you this, if in fact that unfolds that way, we're going to smoke it for everything we can, because you have to. It's the best answer I can give you.
Now, from what I hear from the medical community, we may just be in luck.
Another thing I want to say about the pandemic is that I don't know if you'd agree with me, Rabbi, but I think you would. It's taught us something really, really important about how our community functions and what's really important. And it's really quite amazing how we've been able to sort of retool and pivot and maintain as much programming as we have, but also services and opportunities for connection. And so for me, I'm completely floored when I think about how amazing it is that we've been able to maintain a congregation without a building at all. So that only gives me hope, A, that we're incredibly adaptable, so we can figure it out. But B, the really, really important thing is the people. And we've paid lip service to that for sure as we were going into this, but nothing really tested that in the same way that this is testing that. And it really makes my heart happy in so many ways that we've been able to connect in so many ways. And just looking at all your faces in all these little boxes, it's really a wonderful thing. And so I just want to say that I think that we're learning a lot of really interesting lessons through this that are actually going to serve us well as we're moving forward.
Well said.
Yeah. Thank you. All right, John, quickly, and then we do want to be sure that others have an opportunity to ask their questions or comments or be heard. And if there's nothing you want to say, you don't have to say anything. So John, quickly, John Brodsky. I'll unmute you, John.
I just want to say that I think we shouldn't minimize our concern over the use of the sanctuary. I think that we should be very strong in trying to use it and as much as we can possibly use it. There is no substitute between this, in my mind, between the social hall and the actual sanctuary. There's something very holy, at least to me, about a sanctuary. And our beautiful sanctuary at Temple Concord is something that many of us will miss greatly. I think that the added sanctuary is extremely comfortable. That's a very plus with those nice seats that they have. It's also, I think, an unusual setting, but I don't think there's any comparison at all between the sanctuary and the social hall. So I think we shouldn't minimize the importance of using it whenever possible.
Thank you, John. Who else would like to speak? Alan Messi, I see you have unmuted yourself. Please go ahead.
Just a simple question for clarification for me anyway. When you refer to the sanctuary, could you be a little more specific? Because it sounds like for historical reasons, that can't be changed. Am I correct? When the people buy the temple,
Our
they can't change the sanctuary. Is that correct?
You want
me
to
to ask, Ken?
go ahead, Jenna.
So the when you're, and Sam can answer this better than anybody, certainly. But the sanctuary, when it's designated, you only need to preserve the outside. The interior could be remodeled. The Schuyler is an example of that. That was the old Temple Addith, now a hotel. But the developer is so taken with the inside of the sanctuary and maintaining how it looks that the thought is to keep it as is, use it as a community, multi-use, multi-purpose space. And so, correct, they do not need to maintain the interior, but the exterior they would. And Sam, please chime in if I'm incorrect on that.
I think you actually are incorrect on that. The nature of the historic designation is for the exterior and interior. The Hotel Schuyler, the old Temple Addith, was never designated either on the National Register or as a protected site. And it had already been, the interior had already been seriously compromised when it was the theater, so there weren't any restrictions. And also the developer, Norm Swanson, didn't use any public money in the project, so he didn't come under any review. In our case, the only way the project is going to go through is if the developer does what the developer has said he would do, which is utmost to preserve both the interior and exterior of the sanctuary. That's the only way he's going to sell it to the city. And they're going to let him tear down the rest of the buildings. That's the way I think it will eventually go. The thing is, it's a religious space. Everything that is not fixed and architectural is considered liturgical, and that is not covered. And we have the option, if we want, to take what we want, including decorations and things like that. However, once we take what we want, the developer would be committed to preserve everything else that we leave intact. I'm hoping personally that the plan comes about that the space can be very well preserved and we can leave the maximum amount of the original fittings and furnishings, not the benches, I'm sure they'll have to go, but, well, I'm not sure, but the decoration, all the wall decoration, and we may take the arc, but you know, the stucco decoration and things like that would all be left intact, and then that would be protected. I do have a question actually that comes out of that. I'm sorry to take the time, but do we have any covenants with the developer that would forbid the use of that space in the future for any Jewish activity? Other congregations that have sold buildings in the past have put those covenants in place. I don't think it was a good thing to do, but they were afraid that people would use those spaces, those old loved spaces, for weddings and bar mitzvahs and things like that, instead of the new spaces, and therefore the new congregations would lose income. Has that been discussed at all, the future use of the space? Do we have any say in that as we go forward? It's not the issue about the new space at Addith, but it's about the future use of the sanctuary if we go forward with the sale.
So the developer we have spoken about it, and actually they would like us to rent back from them to use it for high holidays and bar mitzvahs and life cycle events. The plan is to have it be a multi-use, multi-purpose space for the community, for big events, for meetings and such. The developer has verbally told us we would have first dibs on it. So if we wanted to have a yearly lease to have it on high holidays and various other events, we would have that option. And again, that's only been verbally talked about, Sam. There's nothing set in stone at all right now.
Wow, if that is for real and that was made known, I think you would persuade most of the people who are still sitting on the fence, or the doubters, and were saying they're not going to stick with the congregation. If they knew that there would be occasions, even once a year, when the congregation was meeting in that space. I mean, it all depends on the space being preserved, but I think that's an incredible option to continue discussing and pursue. And that's, we'll talk about it later, but very interesting.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep.
People would just be so excited to struggle to find parking around Madison Avenue. I see the Pasco's hand.
Yes, this is Gary Jacobs. On the same line, I think that would be a wonderful thing if we could use our sanctuary, our beloved sanctuary, on the high holidays. And I just want to give my support to that. I think this would make it, the congregation, people who are not supportive of the sale, I think this would allow this group of people to get some comfort, and I think it would assure that the sanctuary would be preserved, and I think on the high holidays that would be a wonderful thing to do. So I want to, give my support to that idea.
Thank you, Gary. We are nearing the top of the hour. Actually, we are now at the top of the hour. But we're happy to stay as long as you have questions or want to say anything. We don't have a time limit, and we're not paying by the minute for Zoom, so we can stay here. Is there anybody else that would like to take a comment? Especially anyone who hasn't had a chance to speak yet.
I was just going to make a quick comment that I too love the idea of having high holy days in the old sanctuary, and I know that a lot of people on the fence would love that and feel better about it, but we do have to recognize that that would be an additional cost. Right now, we were talking about some place in the Temple Addith building, maybe the social hall, and that's already built into our, our lease contract. If we did choose to go back to our old sanctuary, that would certainly incur a cost.
Correct.
I could probably use the dictionary, but what I was really looking for is what are the specific limitations of our sanctuary? In other words, I know the bima, and what does it include and it does not include? Because we keep saying sanctuary, and I'm looking for a more specific, the boundaries of that sanctuary.
So geographically, structurally?
Yeah, structurally.
Okay, so Sam, you're the expert. We'll defer to you.
Well, the sanctuary building and what they're thinking as the historic building is all of the original structure from the 1910-11 construction. We have essentially asked that the social hall, which was radically transformed in 1929, not be included in that, but only the worship space, the Bet Tefillah, the house of prayer, which is all of the large space from the steps when you come in to the vestibule, to the whole area where we have the pews, up onto the bima, the ark, and all of that. Now, we can then make a decision as a congregation to take any of those parts out and with us, and that would be something that would be done in consultation with the developer, and it would be dependent on what our needs are for the future use of any of those elements and incorporation of them in a new home, and what the developer thinks would be viable in whatever future use that space would be, would serve. I'm sure if the developer thought that we were going to come back and use the space as a synagogue once a year, more would be left maybe than less. But if we would never come back and it was just going to be a concert hall, a theater space, a recreational space, anything, then there would be no strong need to save certain elements. A lot of it, the fine points are negotiated. Much of the detail is described in the designation report that we actually wrote in 2008, but for the National Register, but much of it is not. So it's left to interpretation. And that's where goodwill comes in, and political will, and from the city, economics, because people in the city are going to be very eager to see the site developed and put on the tax rolls, especially as we're suffering so badly right now from the effects of the pandemic. So that's all I can say. But the sanctuary is the sanctuary, the chapel is the chapel, the social hall is the social hall. Those are all distinct spaces, and it's only the sanctuary that we as a congregation are asking be preserved, because we collectively believe that it's a historic and beautiful architectural space. We also believe that it is the only way, I believe it's the only way that the city will give approval to the rest of the developer's plan, which would give us the money to allow us to start again. But the board has discussed this at great length, I'm sure, and has weighed the pros and cons of all of these.
There's a model actually for having an old sanctuary to return to. In Cleveland, some years ago, the big Reform Synagogue sold their building to Case Western Reserve University, and Case allows them to come back in for high holidays. Case turned it largely into a concert hall and performance space. So it looks a little different. I mean, obviously, you know, the Yortzeit plaques are all gone because those went with the synagogue to their new building. And the bima is a little bit different, but the general feel of the room is the same. And I suspect as we go forward with this, that model may be one that we look at again more closely. Just as the Philadelphia model that Sam talked about earlier is one that can teach us. I think the Cleveland piece also has an interesting parallel. And we're doing our best to look for those things and to find ways to learn from other places around the country.
Thank you, Rabbi. Alan, does that answer your question completely, thoroughly?
I understand, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And, by the way, I just want to say to you specifically, your weekly letters, notification of what's going on, being out here where I am, I'm not that far away, but it informs me very well. Not as much as some, I'm sure, but thank you for your efforts. I look forward to being notified and doing what you do. It enlightens me because I don't get that information out here, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for your comment. I'm looking at a couple of the Brady bunch that haven't yet said anything. I just want to make sure you have space to. So Tim and Lori Williamson and Brad Seidman, either of your families, would you like to say anything, question, comment? You don't have to, just want to make sure you have the space to. You need to unmute yourself. Here, I'll unmute you.
I unmuted myself, Ken. So a few years ago, we were members of ADA before we switched over to Concord. And I did have a question about the kosher part. They said that you could not bring it at that time. You could not bring in anything that was not kosher, not from a BJ's or a Harrison's for any event. It had to come specifically from their caterers or a kosher caterer that they worked with. Is that the case now, or is ADA going to be allowed to use bringing BJ's in and Harrison's?
So I can speak to that a little bit, and please, if there's more information that you all know. But we have already started meeting with ADA just to sort of feel them out even before the decision was made. And I don't know if they've changed their policies since that was told to you, but they absolutely do let BJ's and Harrison in. So definitely BJ's specifically by name. And that was straight from Barbara Seidman, who was talking to us about what they recommend when their B'nai Mitzvah families are looking for options. If they don't want to go super fancy, you know, that she always points them to there. So so that's the situation right now.
Thank you, Ken. Does that answer your question, Brett?
Yes, thank you.
Thanks. And the Williamsons?
Well, I would just, this is Lori. I would just say that we came from a congregation in Texas that went through a lot of changes and had to move facilities. And, you know, there's a lot of things to consider. The thing that I would just recommend to people is that, you know, you need to learn to be a little flexible. You need to, you know, consider that there are going to be changes. Some things are going to be, people are going to love, some things people are not going to, but, you know, in the long run, it's all about keeping the congregation together and growing. And that's the important thing that you've got to remember. It's not the building so much as it is the people of the congregation.
Thank you for your comments. Amy, I did see your hand up. Do you want to top that, or anything pressing that you'd like to add?
That was Gary this time.
Yeah, it was me. Just a quick thing on, I don't want to beat a dead horse. And I really understand and appreciate the concept of being able to return to our old sanctuary and using it that way. But since we probably have absolutely no control of how they're going to use that space, it somehow seems like a sacrilege to have our old, what looks like whatever's left over from a beam of the ark, and so on there, while they're having rock concerts, discos, New Year's Eve parties, totally secular, maybe totally antithetical to Jewish. It just doesn't seem right to me to leave those sacred things in that place just so we could return every once in a while. You know, I mean, conceptually it seems really beautiful, but it just doesn't seem right, on top of the fact that, you know, we're spending money that we don't really need to spend.
So that's certainly a point of view that, you know, is you know, equally as important as the idea of being able to go back. And that's a discussion that'll happen. So certainly no decisions have been made around that. Thank you all. We are about 10 past 8. Is there anything else that you would like to know or say? Anyone? Steve?
How do we do this?
You're on. You're live.
Oh, cool. Just one question, one economic question. When examining the other sites and the added site, I'm assuming the costs were similar for temporary housing? The cost?
Yeah. The other sites we looked at were all within $20,000. So they were all close, and that even includes staying at Concord.
Okay. That was going to be my next question. how does that compare to our current occupancy building costs just to occupy our current facility?
Yeah, that's not going to be our deficit problem.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought about that, but I was just curious. That was more of a curious. My other, yeah, go ahead.
It's a great question and one that we spent a lot of time on, and it took a lot of time getting that information. And we were not going to make a decision until we had all those final numbers.
Okay. My other comment was, I think it's very important that several people brought up the distinction between merging and sharing space. And it's so important for the congregation as a whole to understand that definition, that we're not merging, we're not being absorbed, we're not absorbing, but it's a mutual thing to help both of us at this current troubled times to share space. And I think that's I was glad that that came up. The other one thing is every time I communicate with you, I tell you how proud I am of the work that you and the board and everybody is doing. Kudos again tonight. Very, very impressed with the dedication I see and glad to be part of it.
Thank you. I am too. It's a great team to be a part of. All right, I'm going to turn to Rabbi for his final thoughts, comments, what we like to call on these meetings, his clergy thing.
Never gets old.
We got to find a better phrase, Ken. There's got to be something. First of all, thank you all. I really appreciate being together. I miss seeing all of you in person more than you know, and to be able to at least see your faces on screen is better than nothing. And second, I appreciate your concern and desire to be involved in all of this. At the end of the day, at least for me, the heart and soul of who Concord is you and me. It's the people. And I don't mean you and me literally. I mean, it's all of us together. When we move to a new building, there are lots of changes. But the heart and soul of who we are, a community that's 180 plus years old, a community that's committed to being a part of the general community, a community that's committed to making the world more whole, all of those pieces, a community that is devoted to equality. All of those things are what make us unique. And all of that can continue whether we are in four walls on Madison Street or Kimber Road or any other street. And I'm convinced that as long as we keep that focus, the focus on us, on the people who make up Concord, we'll be all right. And so that becomes our challenge, is to maintain that focus on ourselves and on each other. And that's what I'm committed to doing, and I'm looking forward to doing that with all of you. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Jeanette, I see your hand up. You know, this is like,
I just in closing, I want to say thank you to Sam Gruber for assisting me this evening in the conversation, because I know you weren't expecting to, and also to say thank you for assisting with the Common Council. Sam has been working with us throughout this and trying to help us kind of pave the way. So thank you, Sam.
and you know, we have so many people to thank. Gary Slutzky is
Absolutely.
countless hours and time to help us get to this point. He had asked further up in the chat, would you like me to share the floor plan? And I said, no, I don't think we need to do that tonight, but know that that information is available. And if you do want to see that, just ask and we can get you, you know, it's a digital copy. We can send it out as well as anything, I believe. I don't know why we couldn't. So if you really want to see what the space looks like, you know, at least on an architectural drawing, we're happy to share that. All right, with that, I'm going to say good night. Thank you. If you love this, tell your friends and neighbors and fellow congregants. If you hate it, don't tell anybody. and please feel free, you know, this is the last meeting this week, but I think we have another 4 or 5 next week. So if you have other questions, or if other questions come up that you hadn't thought about and you want to come back, please do. Just register and Cherie will acknowledge that.
Thank you, Ken.
Good to see you all.
Nice to see you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you.